Catherine, first of all, I wondered how easy is it for independent cinemas to take risks in showing films, and sort of, if you were not to take risks, what would the consequences be if you just dished up the usual fare?
Well, it would be quite boring, obviously. I think the thing is, on the one hand, it's really difficult to take risks. You have to be really entrepreneurial, you have to be really innovative, you have to do lots with not very much money, you have to be creative, you have to be imaginative, you have to really engage in you have to be very audience focused, very much around who are the audiences that I'm serving, who are the communities I'm serving, who's this film for, which is kind of not necessarily a question. You know, if a film's had, 10 million spent on marketing on it and it's on a bus everywhere, then actually those questions are not the first things that are going to come into your mind. Whereas if you've got a small film, it's something that came from, that you saw at a festival, it's something small, but it might really speak to the people in your environment. You really have to think about what you're going to do. So it's really, really important, but at the same time, it is always really challenging because your profit margins are so much smaller. And you're often, the way that the industry works is no one can ever tell you, no one ever really knows whether something will really work or not. We have kind of good ideas, we can look at the data, we can look at the history, but there are always things that surprise you, and then there are always things that disappoint you. And if you do this work, if you're a programmer or a curator, we have all had that experience, and in a way we teach courses or run courses for people or do lots of continuing professional development and stuff for new entrants, and I often say to people, you haven't really started to learn anything until you put on a screening and no one turns up. It's like you've got to have that experience to start coming because it's a dialogue, and it's about sharing something that you think is, so I think it's really, really important, but it's really hard. It's a real challenge, but that's why it's interesting, obviously, and dynamic.
And foreign language stuff, does that still... I remember going to the Three Colours, someone did the whole trilogy at the Riverside Studios. Would anyone do that now? Or would that...
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the sort of space that we sit in, and I mean, not only are audiences interested in new films, they're interested in the history of cinema as well. So seeing older films, and in fact repertory cinema has been something that's been growing over the past, I would say, 10 years, which I think is largely, one of the reasons for that is that younger audiences are more aware of the kind of breadth of film culture through, platforms like Letterboxd, IMDb, so there's much, much more awareness of the history of film. And so when you screen older films, and I remember when The Three Colours was first released, but the audiences will come and see them in the cinema. And I think, speaking to your last point about risk-taking, I think audiences really appreciate risk-taking. That what you can get in the mainstream is the kind of franchise model, because what you're trying to do is build on the success of previous kinds of cinema. So we may well get Barbie 2, but thinking about Oppenheimer 2 is a different proposition, because there was a kind of individual story. And what I feel is that, and what I experience is that audiences want to engage in ideas and want to engage in the ideas that film can generate, and independent cinemas are great places for catering for that discussion.
And what would help you do show more current British films? If it's going to all go heritage, it's a bit dangerous, isn't it? If it's all the old stuff, what would help? Do you have to do more events like you did with the 12 Years a Slave? And Steve McQueen grew up in my constituency. His mum, I know. It's abroad now.
Well, I mean, that's a great example, and it's a great example of an illustration of where independent cinemas kind of support and the interdependencies in the industry between the independent, and the commercial mainstream. Is that Steve McQueen, when he made his after he'd done his art career, when he made his first film Hunger, it was shown in independent cinemas first, and kind of he's demonstrated himself as a filmmaker. When he released 12 Years a Slave, it opened in commercial cinemas as well as independent cinemas. When we screened that film, and this is a kind of another illustration of this kind of strength of what independent cinemas that are kind of place-based and thinking about and relating to their local communities, is, I might not sound it, but I've been in Bristol for 30 years. And when we screened 12 Years a Slave, as I say, it opened commercially, i.e. it opened on a kind of wide release of, I don't know, maybe 300 prints. So it was on in the commercial, in the multiplex, as well as on at Watershed. But, you know, I thought with showing a film that is about slavery in a city with a very problematic and unresolved relationship with the slave trade, that we should look at doing events and talks with it. And we worked with a black curating group called Come the Rev, and decided to put on a series of informal and formal events, because I do think that if people just want to go and watch a film, they should just go and watch a film. But equally, here was a film that was dealing with a very important subject matter, and we had opportunities for people to engage with that. And we had a young black woman at one of the events, and she said, she said, thanks very much for doing this. I'd been to see the film at the multiplex, and if you think about that young black woman's journey through the multiplex, and then being transported into Steve McQueen's fantastic, powerful representation of plantations and the slave trade, and she came out of that screening and she simply wanted to have a conversation about it, but that commercial model is not geared up for that conversation. It's geared up to maximise income, and it does a brilliant job, and multiplexes have done a brilliant job in raising the profile and income for cinema, but for that conversation, it's not geared up for it. Whereas that's the kind of intervention and the kind of place that we can have that conversation. So it's opening up, not just the money aspect, but it's the meaning aspect of the film. And because we're close to the local communities, that we can build relationships across those communities to have those conversations.